Okay, guys, so today we're going to start a new chapter and we're going to do some review on volume. Now, volume is another way to measure objects, and in particular, we'll be talking about 3D, so volume of 3D objects, three-dimensional. Now, we remember we've learned perimeter. Perimeter is when we are measuring just the outsides, right? We add up all the outsides. If these were both 2 centimeters, and these were 4 centimeters, then the perimeter would be 2 plus 4, which is 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 4 is 12. And we've learned about area, right? Area is how much space is covered, right? So if this was 5 by 2, 5 centimeters, 2 centimeters, area is length times width, so area, the area of this would be 10 centimeters. And when we do area, we talk about its square units, because we're multiplying two numbers. And today we're going to talk about volume. And for volume, we're actually going to talk about volume of 3D objects. So we are not going to do squares or rectangles. We are going to do 3D objects, kind of like boxes. Or this kind of looks like an ice cube. I'm doing these dotted lines for what's behind that we can't see. And for volume, we know that this is the outside. Perimeter is like the outside measurements.
What do you want to eat?
Outside, the area, which is the amount of space that gets covered. And then for volume, we talk about volume. Volume is, I made a smiley face. Volume is equal to the amount of space that something takes up. The amount of space something takes. The amount of space that something is taking up, right? Like, what has a higher volume? You or a car? Of course, a car. A car takes up more space than you, right? Who has a higher volume? Me or Bernie? I take up more space in the classroom because I'm a bigger person. Bernie has to eat more pizza to catch up to me. Well, just like area, let's move on. With area, we call things square units, right? 5 by 2 centimeters, and the area equals 10 centimeters squared. So they are square units. This is square units. Well, for volume goes one step further. We will learn about squaring numbers. Then when something has a indice or an exponent of 3, it's cubed. So for volume, we are going to use cubic. Volume uses cubic units, not just straight up units like perimeter, like 20 centimeters, or square units like 10 square centimeters. Nope, we're going to be using cubic units. So let's talk about just 3. We're going to stay with the metric system. Let's talk about 3 types of units we will use. First, for the smallest ones, we have millimeters, right? You might use a millimeter to measure maybe the volume of just like a marble, how much a marble takes up, a very small glass marble. And that would be in millimeters cubed, right? Then we also have centimeters. Now you might measure the volume of like your phone, or maybe the volume of your iPad or something like that. And that would be measured in cubic centimeters. And then maybe something a lot bigger, like a gigantic stone, or maybe your maybe the back of a truck, a kata, or even a house, or maybe a gigantic box that you got because you bought 50 laptops on Shopee. Well, you would measure those in cubic meters. So just remember the millimeters and cubic millimeters, that would be for small things, very small things. Let's even say very small. Centimeters, cubic centimeters, that would be kind of like some small to medium-sized things. And then cubic meters, we would use that for much larger things. Okay, so now that we know about the 3 units, we can just use a conversion table to convert the numbers. Conversion table. And with volume, the numbers change quite a lot. So let's make a quick conversion table. We'll start with our biggest unit, which is cubic meters. Then our next unit, which is cubic centimeters. And our last unit, which is cubic millimeters. Now, first we're going to talk about the jump from going from meters down to centimeters. That's actually quite a lot. So when we're using volume in cubic units, when we go from cubic meters to centimeters, the difference is actually 1,000,000 units. And centimeters to millimeters, they are much closer to each other. So when we convert something that's in cubic centimeters to millimeters, the change is by 1,000. Now remember, when we convert from meters to centimeters, the number is going to increase, because let's just say we measured something and it was 0.1 cubic meters. So something that is just 0.1 cubic meters, if we were going to convert that to centimeters, we would take that 0.1 and multiply it by 1,000. Remember, 0.1 times, sorry, not 1,000, 1,000,000. And actually what we can do is when we multiply by tens, hundreds, thousands, we just move the decimal place how many times to the right, how many zeros there are. So 0.1, and how many zeros are in 1,000,000? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll move the decimal point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll fill in those empty spaces with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. So that means something that is 0.1 cubic meters is going to be 1 with 5 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means it's going to be 100,000 cubic centimeters. And then if we were going to go even one step further, we would do 100,000 times 1,000. And remember, we just keep moving our decimal point with how many zeros there are. There are 3 zeros. So if we do 100,000 and we add 3 more zeros, 1, 2, 3, that means something that is 0.1 cubic meters is 100,000 cubic centimeters, and even more than that, it is 100 million millimeters, cubic millimeters. So the difference when we talk about cubic units, it's much bigger than when we're just changing meters, centimeters, and millimeters. Now I want to go back the other way. So let's go back to our table. So when we go from meters to centimeters, we multiply by 1,000,000. And from centimeters to millimeters, you multiply by 1,000. Well, if we go the other way, we're going to do the opposite. So what's the opposite of multiplying? It's dividing. So if we go from millimeters to centimeters, you divide by 1,000. And when you go from centimeters to meters for cubic units, you would divide by, oh my gosh, you would divide by 1,000,000. E by 1. Super quadzong. Okay, so let's do some converting questions. Our first question, we have convert, which means to change. We are going to convert 4.56 cubic centimeters to cubic millimeters. If we go back to our table up here, we see that when we go from centimeters to millimeters with the cubic conversion table, we have to multiply by 1,000. So we take our number that's with our unit, 4.56, and we multiply it by what the table says. We multiply it by 1,000. Now, like I said before, when we multiply, take the decimal place and we move it to the right with how many zeros there are. There's 3 zeros. So we can take 4.56 and move that decimal place 1. Move that decimal place 1, 2, 3 times. And any extra space, you simply add a 0. My touchscreen isn't working. I'll use the mouse. And this is where a decimal place gets moved to. So that means our answer is going to be this new number. Our answer is going to be 4,560 cubic millimeters. Oof, sorry, that was a rough circle. Let's do one more question. Let me pop it up for you. So our next one, we have 324,000 cubic centimeters to cubic meters, the biggest one. So it shouldn't take that many cubic meters to be converted, because a cubic meter is much greater than a cubic centimeter. So if we go back to our table, we see when we go from centimeters back over to the greater unit, meters, we divide by 1,000,000. So we're going to take this number that's with the cubic centimeters, 324,000, and we're going to divide it by 1,000,000. Now before we were moving the decimal point to the right when we multiply, but when we divide, we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to move it to the left by how many zeros there are. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. So we're going to take this decimal point and we're going to move it to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places to the left. So what does that mean? Well, if we're asked to convert this huge number in cubic centimeters to cubic meters, we now write our answer that in cubic meters it would be 0.32